Back in August, I made a video titled The State of Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2020, and I talked about some of the good and bad things that were happening in the game at the time. Now, right after that, a new ban list dropped, and now we're well into a new format, but I did want to talk about something that yesterday's video reminded me of, and a couple of you guys said you would be interested in learning about it. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Ridge Wallets. If you're sick of your outdated bulky leather wallet, then a Ridge wallet is the perfect upgrade. It's sleek, industrial, you can easily hold up to 12 cards, and there's even a convenient money clip on the back for carrying cash. Ridge wallets even have a lifetime warranty, so you'll never need to buy another wallet. The Ridge team is so confident that you'll like it, they'll let you try it out for 45 days, and you can send it back for a full refund if you don't absolutely love it. If you're interested in picking up a Ridge wallet, make sure to click the link in the description below, and don't forget to use promo code Dzeeff in all capital letters for 10% off your order. One of the things that I mentioned in that State of Yu-Gi-Oh! Video is that even though the metagame on paper was pretty diverse, I mean there were lots of different decks that were topping and doing well, when you actually looked at the combos, many of them were using the same starter cards and ending on the same types of extra deck monsters. We saw Helki Fibrax and Anaconda and Union Carrier, often leading to Borreload Savage Dragon and Appaloosa and Herald of the Arclight. And I want to make it very clear that there's nothing wrong with having powerful Link 2 monsters, and there's also nothing wrong with having negations in the format. I do want to say here, and maybe this will alienate me from some of my more casual viewers, but I really do not think hand traps are part of this discussion. If anything, hand traps are one of the only ways to prevent these big negation boards from ever happening. I know I have an older video on how hand traps break Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe sometime I'll get around to updating that, but at most levels, hand traps actually do help lesser viable strategies beat the top decks. But for me, especially over the past like 6 months or so, it really does feel like many combo decks, and even the rogue level ones, are all ending on these same types of cards. They're all powerful extra deck monsters with negation abilities. And that's not to say that the format right now is unplayable. It certainly does have some cooler strategies that are top tier and seeing a lot of success, but when you play online or you play in your remote dual locals or whatever, a lot of the rounds will be against the exact same combos, even if the actual deck itself is not the same every single time. And even if every single deck is not using those same combos, enough decks are where it can get pretty repetitive if you play enough games. So I'm feeling a little bit of negation fatigue. I actually do miss when decks were ending on interruptions that, while still powerful, weren't always on extra deck monsters that simply said negate a card. I think back to when the top 4 decks were Orcus, Sky Strikers, Salamangreat, and Thunder Dragons. So all these decks did have negation abilities, but they were all different. You know, we saw different cards being used, we saw different ending boards, and that really did make it feel more unique instead of every single deck ending on the same couple of cards. With Orcus, for example, at one point for a while we saw people always ending on IP Masquerena with a skeleton for Dingirsu in the graveyard. Now this is pretty exciting, you know, you have some interesting interactions. The skeleton can bring back the Dingirsu to send a card or equip a card if they want to. The IP can be turned into Nightmare Unicorn or maybe Zeroboros or something along those lines. If your opponent has an IP Masquerena and a Galatea with a Crescendo, now you have some ways to play around those cards because they don't have a lot of attack points and the IP can only be used in the main phase, and the Galatea has to be on the field for the Crescendo to work. Other decks in that format that I mentioned, we have Salamangreats, a deck that usually at most is going to have Rage and Roar and maybe some hand traps, which was very different from Sky Strikers, which ended on Widowmaker and Shark Cannon to interrupt the opponent using quick play spells. Chaos Thunder Dragons ended on boards that were pretty similar to what we see today. They had big monsters with negation effects. However, even while that deck was a competitively viable deck, people kept finding more ways to play it and different extra deck monsters to use to stop their opponent's plays. So while Chaos Thunder Dragon players were always trying to end on big monsters with interruption type effects, the early versions of Chaos Thunder Dragons looked very different from the ending version, not only because of ban list changes, but because people were trying out new extra deck monsters to interrupt their opponent, so the deck was always sort of growing over time. And during those many formats where those 4 decks were very popular, They weren't always perfect, and I'm not saying that they were. However, at least it felt different even when you played against meta decks every single round, because all of them were doing different things. Yes, they often did have at least one negation, but their other unique forms of interruption were a lot more crazy than what we see nowadays, where pretty much every single deck is trying to end on the exact same board. This is why Dark Ruler No More has been so popular over the past like 6 or so months. I know right now a lot of people are playing more and more hand traps, but especially early on with Eldritch and Adamancipator, everyone was pretty much playing Dark Ruler No More, and eventually we even saw it in main decks occasionally, which was pretty crazy. If every single deck is just trying to turbo out to the exact same thing, big extra deck monsters with negation effects, of course cards like Dark Ruler No More are going to be mandatory. It simply is the best counter to many modern strategies. And right now it's gotten to the point where it's so crazy where if you don't stop your opponent's combo before it actually ends, you don't even have a chance to use cards like Dark Ruler No More, because your opponent will have looped all the cards out of your hand and also ended on extra negations. It really has gotten to the point where you have to open a hand trap if you want to have any chance of winning, which is never a good feeling. Even in past formats where we've had big combo decks, you don't always see situations where you have to open a hand trap or you just lose every single time. Oftentimes you had tech options like System Down against Orchist or Sphere Mode against Thunder Dragons, but for a while now it's felt really all or nothing. You either draw the hand trap to stop the combo or you go to the next game. And obviously that's not really a good feeling, and a lot of the reason is that your opponent, while they're comboing off, already is setting up negations where if you have a hand trap that can't be used early in the combo, your hand trap is suddenly useless. Which is why in yesterday's video, when I looked at those 2 new extra deck monsters, I was a little bit disappointed because I really feel like they could be a lot more interesting. They don't necessarily need negation effects, even if that is the better thing in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, Thunderclap Tyrant I think would be pretty cool, popping a card or maybe flipping the monster face down after discarding a monster. That would be a little bit more interesting than just negating monster effects. Divine Tree Beast has a similar issue. The first effect is so cool, attaching cards from your graveyard to it. Having spells or traps equipped to this card is a really unique mechanic. Konami knows how to make a cool card with this type of mechanic. They did it with Time Thief Redoer. In that card, every single type of card that's equipped to it gives it a new ability, and that is really, really unique, and we don't see it on a lot of cards. When I read the first half of this card's effect, I really thought the second effect would say detach one of these types of cards to like shuffle one of those types of cards on the field into the deck, but then it just turned into another negation effect, and I was like, okay, it's still kind of cool, but it could have been a lot better. I'm acknowledging here, by the way, that if you made these changes to these 2 cards at this point compared to other cards that people could summon, they probably would not be played at all, and that is a problem. Negation fatigue is not just about changing a couple cards here and there, it's about changing how Konami looks at designing ending boards and them releasing more cards that do things besides just negate. And I know people are going to say there's no difference between playing through 4 negates rather than 4 other types of interruption, but I really disagree. I think it's a lot more skillful when you have to use your cards not just to bait negations until you finally stick a big effect, but rather to play through your opponent's interruptions in cool ways that will be different for every single type of strategy. Even with Eldritch, a deck that does have a lot of cool mechanics, a lot of people when Jet Synchron was legal, but also people right now were just playing the Eldritch cards to combine with the Synchro part, which ended on, yes, of course, Borreload Savage Dragon and Herald of the Arc Light. Yes, it did play the Eldritch cards, and yes, they did matter, and yes, they were really good, but it still felt like every other matchup because the ending board was pretty much the exact same. The recent Forbidden and Limited List update did help with this, by the way. Banning Jet Synchron did make a huge difference, but I'm not sure it's enough, and it might not be enough until events start up again and Konami is a little bit more willing to hit cards on the ban list. We're still in that situation where there aren't really big events going on, so Konami seems to not want to hit too many things at once. The last ban list was actually pretty refreshing. I'm glad they did make as many changes as they did, but I think that many of the extra deck cards that we have right now that people pretty much already know are overpowered should probably probably end up on the ban list at some point. And then after that happens, maybe Konami can say, okay, now that we've hit some of the bigger problem cards, the cards that were way too generic that pretty much everyone was using, maybe now we can make some cards that have real drawbacks and maybe that can't be played in almost any deck. Once again, as I mentioned in my State of Yu-Gi-Oh 2020 video, I'm not sure if all of these cards were meant to exist at the same time. I think that obviously events getting canceled has really complicated things quite a bit. But there are some pretty cool effects in the format right now, and I do want to mention those before I end the video. Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, even though it's a little bit older than most other cards right now, that one actually is very unique. You know, it's a Book of Eclipse with a big body, and that is very, very nice. You also have, and I know I'm a little bit biased here, but the Dogmatica cards. Dogmatica Punishment is a very interesting card, as are all of the other Dogmatica cards. You have some pretty cool interactions that, while yes, Fleur-de-Lis is a negation effect, at least it has a drawback though, and I really do also enjoy Dogmatica Punishment and Dogmatica Maximus and Nadir Servant and how they interact with extra deck monsters in a very unique way that we don't usually see. I don't know what it is, I just wish there were more unique effects in Yu-Gi-Oh right now, and I say all this not because I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is dying or that this is the worst format that we've ever had, but more so because I want end boards that are actually unique to their own strategies instead of seeing the same types of end boards in every single match. Please let me know in the comment section how you guys feel about this. Am I exaggerating? Am I not talking about it enough? How do you feel about Yu-Gi-Oh right now? Please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'll see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.